Continue the Newton's laws of motion that we were starting yesterday, and this is day 2 of those classes. So let me start off from where I left. Okay. So this was our yesterday's class where we looked at concept of inertia, introduced ourselves to a lot of terms and terminologies that we would be encountering in this topic. Right. Very quickly, let me revise. So we introduced the concepts. We took the basic assumptions under Newtonian mechanics. We realized that Newtonian mechanics is going to be the backbone of our next few months of syllabus, and some assumptions in which it is valid were taken into account. Okay, so one of the main things being the velocities of the bodies involved should be very small compared to light. Okay, so just one word that you need to add there. Those velocities are called non-relativistic velocities. Okay, non-relativistic velocities. Any velocity which is very small compared to light is called a non-relativistic velocity. Okay. So I just wanted to give you a basic picture of how to remember easily in what conditions is classical mechanics valid. So this is the ideology. So you can see the scale of size has been drawn on this line, and scale of speed is drawn on this line. Okay, so speed has been marked from the basis of, let's say, walking speeds to speed of light, and size has been marked in terms of atomic sizes. That means these points are very small in size. As you keep increasing, then you talk about the planetary sizes. Okay, right. So if you are in this range of both the speeds and sizes, then you are in classical mechanics. So this is basically what we are dealing with. But if speed is starting to increase, then you have to go to relativity. And if speed increases and size decreases to the very small, then we'll go to quantum field theory. And if speed is small but the size is also small, then you will end up having quantum mechanics. So our basic syllabus at 11th class and 12th class level for JEE would revolve mostly around this part, right? That classical mechanics part. Only here the laws will be applicable. So Newton's laws of motion are here, and also some part of Bohr's model and all those things that we'll study in modern physics, we only will venture into this part. So a small part of quantum mechanics we do study, right? Major part of classical mechanics we finish. We'll never enter these two in our JEE syllabus. We actually start doing that once we go into our colleges. Okay, so that's the whole idea. Newton's first law introduced the concept of inertia. I defined different types of inertia. I gave you examples also, right? So just wanted to round it off with pictures. So this is one famous example that we keep asking in theoretical questions, where you have a glass, you have kept a pin on the top of glass using a paper, and you suddenly flick off that paper. You could see paper flew away, and this pin, which was in rest, tries to continue in the state of rest. It doesn't want to move until unless you have to apply a very large force on it. Because you never gave time for this paper to interact with this, there was no force acting which is substantial to cause this one to change the state of its inertia. So inertia is a concept which only changes if force is applicable, whether it is of rest or whether it is of any other type. So the proof that it continues to stay at rest is because that it stayed here and there was no support, and therefore the pin fell into this. So if someone shows you this picture and asks you which type of inertia are you looking at, you would say inertia of rest. Another famous example that you can consider is the example of inertia is when your car is moving and you have to wear seat belt. Then if you suddenly apply brakes to the car stops, but your body, which was in state of motion, continues to be in the state of motion. You could see it starts, it doesn't start moving. It was already in motion. Please understand, in this picture, it continues to do so until unless there is an external force applied to stop that particular motion. So this concept, obviously, you would realize will be called as inertia of motion. Okay, so that would be inertia of motion. Okay, next. This is the inertia of direction example where please understand that you are looking at the left side, sorry, right side. This is the initial instant of the car. Car is moving towards the left of the screen. Okay, you're taking a turn. Can you see? You're taking a turn. You start here, take a left turn like this. So if the turn is or the curvature is very sudden, then a person sitting here, right? Can you see? There's a person sitting here continues to go in the same direction that he is moving. Okay, so car actually took a curved path. The person actually moves in a straight line, and therefore you have to find him here. Okay, as per the ground observer or as per the observer standing on the road. Okay, but with respect to the car, you moved from this seat to this seat. So this person will feel that he has been thrown off to the right. Okay, so during a left turn, you feel that you're being thrown off to the right, but it's actually what is the example that you're looking at? It is the inertia of direction. A body continues to move in the direction that it was moving already until unless there is a force applied. So you want to not go into this direction and go along with the car, then you have to hold your left hand onto this door, right? That's what we instinctively do in order to ensure that we don't go onto the right side seat. Okay, so this is another example I wanted to show you of inertia. We did the statement of first law. We did the statement of second law. We took the very special case of second law also, where if mass is constant and it's a closed system, then we wrote F is equal to ma. And we defined terms and terminologies called systems surrounding internal external force, and we stopped here. So we are now going to introduce ourselves to the fundamental forces of nature, right? So how all the forces that we encounter in all the topics of physics, that means all the 4 topics that we talked about, not just classical mechanics, but the entire 4 topics, even in future, can be classified into these 4 types. Okay, so according to the modern theories, even this electromagnetic force and weak nuclear force, they have clubbed into one. Okay, so but based on our syllabus and our expertise at this particular point of time, because we don't go into higher level stuff, we do consider these two as separate. Okay, so but at higher level physics, these two are already been clubbed to become a unified field. Okay, so right now we'll say these 4 forces that are there. So what are these 4 forces? First one is the strong nuclear force. The second one is the weak nuclear force. And third one is the electromagnetic force. So in this electromagnetic force, already you have electrostatic force and magnetic force clubbed together. And the fourth one that we are most familiar at this point of time is gravitational forces. Okay. So what things differentiate these 4 forces is illustrated in this particular table. Strong nuclear forces, they are responsible for holding the nucleus. Okay, so whatever information is there in here, don't look at the 4th column. Can you see there is a 4th column here? Just that is slightly over our range. Okay, so these things right now you don't need to look at. I'll talk about that also just fleetingly as I move along, but no need to talk about this. So these are the parts that we'll be concentrating on. So strong nuclear forces are the ones which hold nucleons together. These plus signs are protons, N is the neutron. So these two are going to be held together using the strong nuclear force. These are short range forces, and the range is only up till the diameter of a medium sized nucleus. Okay, so Fermi is this unit, or femtometer is another way of calling 10 power minus 15. So even for a large size nucleus, within that large size, every neutron will not interact with another neutron if the distance between them is more than this particular range. Okay, so that's very important. It's very strong, but it has a very short range in this particular context. To consider or compare the strength of the other forces, we'll take the strength of this as 1 unit. Let's suppose, just for fun, the strong nuclear force, if you consider the strength as 1, let's see how other forces fare in comparison. Okay. Electromagnetic forces are the ones which are encountered by the only charged particles. Remember, strong nuclear force is encountered by both charged and neutral particles. Even neutron, neutron, proton, neutron, proton, proton, all of them will have the strong nuclear force, whereas electromagnetic force is only for charged particles. Here, the range is infinite. That means these forces, just like gravity, can act at very large distance also. That's the major difference between the strong nuclear force and electromagnetic forces. Okay, right. And the strength compared to this would be 1 by 137. Okay, so 1 by 137 is the value of the strength in comparison to the strong nuclear force, about 100 times weaker, you could say. And then weak nuclear force, and this weak nuclear force also occurs inside the nucleus, but only for small duration. This is not a permanent force. This occurs during a nuclear reaction called as beta decay, which you will study during nuclear physics. Okay, so the neutrino interaction, neutrinos are the particles which are emitted during a beta decay, and those neutrinos at the time of being emitted, they will be bound by the nucleus using this weak nuclear forces. And as the term suggests, it's weak because in comparison to the strong one, this is million times lesser in strength. And also the range is also even smaller. Okay, right. So you'd see in comparison to the proton size, this is approximately the proton size is 0.1% of the diameter of the proton. Okay, so very small value and very small range, smaller range than this one. So if someone asks you out of these which has the least range, then it should be weak nuclear force. Which has the least strength, then the cup goes to gravity. Gravity has the least amount of strength as compared to the any of these three forces. So if any of these three forces are available in a physical situation, we'll ignore gravity. But if these three are not there, then gravity becomes the king. That's the main important thing that you need to understand. Again, just like electromagnetic forces, this one's range is also infinite, but the strength is very, very small. Okay, so that's the idea. So that's why when you go to subatomic levels, right, subatomic levels, gravity will be ignored. We will never consider gravitational force of interaction. It will be there, but it's so small in comparison that we'll never compare them when we go to Bohr's atomic model or something of that sort at a microscopic level. Okay, right. Let me talk very quickly about this. No need to remember these particles. What this column suggests is these forces, how they happen between them. A modern theory suggests that there will be always particles exchanged between them to interact with each other. Just like two friends playing catching of ball one after another. Let's say you throw a ball to your friend and he throws the ball back to you. That kind of game they believe is responsible for uh, the way the particles react with each other. Okay, so what are those interactive particles that are thrown at each other in order to have this force is listed here. In case of strong nuclear force, those particles which are exchanged to feel the force are called as gluons and pions. Okay, right. So then electromagnetic forces are exchanged with each other using photons. Okay, so the light is responsible for the electromagnetic force being interacted with for the particles. Okay, so mass of photon is 0. There is a spin also associated, so we need not look at all these things. Then weak nuclear forces are exchanged from each other using some vector bosons. It's much more complicated, as you could see. Okay, right. Whereas gravity, they feel, right, they believe that it is due to the exchange of particles called as gravitons. And why they put a question mark? Because this is still a theory. All these particles have been already discovered. The ones that are theoretically put up, they have already been discovered as we stand in 2020. Year 2020, these are already discovered. Gravitons are theories, and there has not been any experimental evidence, and the works are still on in order to experimentally prove the presence of a particle called graviton. So even before discovering, they already know what is the properties of that graviton. That's the power of physics. Okay, right. So we'll just move ahead. These are the basics of the fundamental forces. The issue is in classical mechanics, because we are going to deal with only certain limited range of forces, we'll be trying to take another classification. This is fundamental classification. Now what we are going to do with is macroscopic classification of forces. That's our next section. So the word macroscopic means as you see, as the humans can see, not at the microscopic level. Okay, so this macroscopic classification helps us easily to understand the physics of the world that you can see. No need to be worrying about atoms and all this. Yes, these macroscopic forces also are due to the fundamental forces in the previous page, but it would make our job easier by classifying them into two types only here. Okay, so what are the two types of classifications that we do in this context? In the macroscopic classification, we believe all the forces, fundamental ones, can be classified into two types. One is contact based forces, another one is the non-contact based forces. Okay, so it's easy, right? Right now there is gravitational force between you and moon. Okay, between you and moon, and that's a non-contact force. Right now there is a force of interaction between you and your chair, and it is contact force. It's easy classification, easy to talk, easy to communicate than the previous page. That's why we rely on this in this chapter. Okay, and what are the different types of forces that come under contact force? Let me write examples here. Normal reaction is one type of contact force that we'll often see. Then friction is another type. Tension is another type of contact force that we'll be looking at. Then in non-contact type, we'll further have basically two types within our classical mechanics, and they are the ones from the previous table itself. Okay, so we'll consider gravity and electromagnetic. And the way we study electromagnetic at the start, we'll actually split electromagnetic into further two parts. For our convenience and also historical purpose, because initially when these theories were proposed, it was believed that these two are two separate forces. So this is electrostatics force or electric forces, and this is magnetic forces. Okay, right. And one very important thing, fundamentally, normal reaction, friction, tension, all these contact based forces belong to the category of electromagnetic forces. Even though for easy communication, we divided them into two parts. But if someone asks you fundamentally, when let's say you take two fingers from two different hands of yours and touch with each other, at fundamental level there is no touching happening. Actually there are electronic orbitals of one finger which are interacting with the electronic orbitals of another finger using the electromagnetic forces, and that causes a sensation, and that pulse will be sent to your brain and you feel it as a context of touch. Okay, so any touch type of force fundamentally is a electromagnetic force. Okay, so you should realize that. Okay, so all of these fundamentally belong to this category, but we will not study them like that so that we can solve the problems easily. Okay, so this is the macroscopic classification. Since these are the three contact forces that we will be looking at, we will try to see examples of each one of these in separate situations now. Okay, so let me write about those forces. I'm talking about contact forces now. When two surfaces are in contact, the contact forces between them, between the two surfaces I'm talking about, between them can be resolved into two components. Okay, right. The one which is normal to the surface of interaction, which is normal to surface of interaction, is called normal reaction. And the one which is parallel to the surface is going to be called friction component. That should tell you that normal reaction and friction are not two separate forces, but they're just components of a contact force between two surfaces that you need to understand. Okay. Okay, right. Now, to keep matters simple in this topic, when two surfaces are ideally considered to be smooth, okay, right, special case, when two ideal assumption, okay, ideal smooth surfaces are in contact, the friction component will be equal to 0. So this week, to keep matters simple, because we are starting out in this topic, we'll be taking the friction would be 0. So that's the idea for this particular week, and we'll try to deal with this topic separately in a different week altogether. Okay, so all our problem solving skills during this week will be revolving around frictionless surfaces, frictionless, smooth. These are the words that we'll be using. Okay, right. So in order to understand the contact forces in a given situation, we need to be able to understand the concept of being able to draw free body diagram. Okay, so let's try to understand what is a free body diagram. So there is a physical diagram for a situation. So for very quickly, if I give you a situation, let's say there is a floor, okay, and there is a block on the floor. Okay, and there's a person trying to push that particular block. So he's trying to push it. So he's asking us to believe that he's pushing it. Okay, right. And this is a block. Right. So this is there is acceleration due to gravity at that place, let's suppose. So we'll try to understand that this is a physical diagram. So if you take a photograph, I know it won't be as bad as I have drawn it, but you get an idea. So this is called a physical diagram. To study the motion of this block under Newton's laws of motion, we need to separate out all these surroundings of the block. So if I remove the surroundings, remember the word system and surrounding from yesterday's class. So if I consider block as my system, everyone else, the floor, the earth which is actually pulling it down, and the person who is pushing it, maybe air molecules which are hitting it, all these things now become the surroundings. Okay, so free body diagram involves only the system with the forces acting on it from the surroundings. So that's what we are going to do. So we just try to draw the block separately in our imagination. So it's an imaginary diagram actually. So block has been separated. And then we will put all the forces on it, right? So surroundings removed. Surroundings removed. Its block is saying to us that surroundings have been removed. Okay, so that is the reason why it's called free body. It's free from its surroundings in the diagram, right? So that's why it's called free body diagram. So in here, let's ask the block what are the external forces that are acting on a free body diagram. Always external forces would be picturized because surroundings have been removed. All the internal forces could be there inside this, but you can't show it in a free body diagram. So always start going from the contact based forces and then go to the non-contact based forces. I see contact from the push of the person, and I see the contact with the floor here. So those are the two contact based forces that I'll put up on the diagram. So one is to the right because it's a push like this, imagine, and there is a push from the floor also. So this would be in the upward direction. So let me label them. I'll label this as F and this as N for normal reaction from the floor. And then there is non-contact forces, which include the gravitational force. So from the center of mass of the system, you would have a gravitational force. Okay, right. So the blue ones are the contact forces, the red one is the non-contact force. Okay. So you just write here, block is the system and rest all are surroundings. Some textbooks show a free body diagram with a dot or a point. I generally don't like that because it's better you draw the entire shape of the body, and it will be useful in the future topic of rotational mechanics where we actually take the size of the block to be considerable. So try to factor in that and try to draw the objects completely instead of putting a dot and putting all these forces at one point. It's okay for this chapter, but in the future it will be nice to have that kind of a practice. Okay, so. Right. One more important thing you should realize is that normal reaction on the free body diagram, normal reaction acts like this, right? So on that block, if I draw that block in a shorter form like this, I've drawn the block again. Actually, the normal reaction acts everywhere in the bottom. So it's a distributed force. It should act like this, right? It's a distributed force. Okay, right. But it's equivalent to a situation where you can say, but it can be exchanged as, in this particular topic, this way, and this will be seen by as lot. Okay, right. So you could see we have done two things here. First and foremost, we have reduced all of this force to one place. Okay, that's not going to affect any of our calculation. Second thing, you can shift this one to any position without affecting any of the calculations. Something like this also you can do. You can pull like this. Okay, if you remember and have gone through the lectures that I have given on vectors, right, and you realize that this type of calculation is called as transmittivity or transmittability of the force. Okay, so the normal reaction in these calculations, as n obeys so n comma f are distributed, n comma f are distributed over, n is distributed over area, and mg is distributed over volume, actually speaking. But in translation, the entire topic that we are going to deal with is called translation topic, right? So translation of objects, as I discussed yesterday. Distribution doesn't matter. That is another point. And also I said it obeys transmittability of force. So that principle is valid when you are trying to calculate the acceleration of the object in translation. Okay, so whether you put the force here or here or here, you just translate that force to any position that you're comfortable with. It doesn't matter. So these are the 2 points you need to realize in this particular chapter when you're drawing the FBDs. Okay, and always writing the equations for this particular block, you should realize that there are 2 directions that are possible for this problem. This is a 2-dimensional problem. So the equations of motion for this object in vertical and horizontal directions are these. Okay, so for the above FBD, in vertical direction, what are the equations? And in horizontal direction, what are the equations? So in vertical direction, you would be able to write n minus mg is equal to the net value of that thing, where acceleration, because the object is not going to move, this should be equal to 0, right? Which implies the value of n equal to mg. I prefer to write all the forces in one place and equate it to mass into acceleration, which in this problem in vertical direction, there is no motion. So then I'll write n equal to mg rather than directly writing n equal to mg. I know you have all got the practice, but I'm trying to put some rules in our class. Okay, so it's up to you whether you want to follow or not. And put all the forces. That means what I mean to say here is LHS is always forces and RHS is the MA term. This is the rule I'm trying to follow. Okay, so that's the reason why I have to write this. Whereas you directly write this, there might be a confusion in future whether this is the force or this is the force and this is the acceleration. So I don't want it. This is like a mathematical consequence of this equation. Okay, right. Whereas in horizontal direction, I think F was acting and you equate it to MA. So if someone asks you, it's very clear here. How many forces are there? Only one force is there. What is this term? This is the effect of that force. So LHS is the cause, RHS is the effect. That's very clear when we write such a statement. Okay, so A is equal to F by M. So this will be the acceleration of the block, assuming there is no friction, and normal reaction balances the weight. These are the statements we'll make once the free body diagram is drawn and equations are written. Okay, so this was very formal. I know most of you know these things, but trying to introduce you to the actual rules and regulations of the free body diagram, it's very, very important at the start. Okay, so this is your FBD. I'll be using short form FBD for free body diagram. Okay, now there is one more Newton's law, that is Newton's third law, which is important before we move on to any more FBDs, because if I want to draw the free body diagram of the floor here, then what is the force applied by the block on the floor is governed by Newton's third law. The normal reaction applied by the floor on the block will be equal and opposite to the normal reaction applied by the block on the floor. I think you all understand and remember from your childhood classes that Newton's third law, it's one of the easiest laws to remember. For every action, there is equal and opposite reaction. Okay, so we'll try to list that one out. And one very important thing, last FBD, just make a note, is incomplete without acceleration. So let me go back and make it complete. Always you will have an idea in which direction it's going to accelerate. Okay, so please show that on the diagram. So this object is going to accelerate towards right. It's pretty clear, right? Because there's no friction, someone is pushing. So always show that acceleration to the right on the top of the diagram. Don't put it on the diagram, it should be away from the diagram. So there is a very clear cut difference. Okay, so these are touching the block, so these are forces, whereas this arrow is away from that and showing a direction, and you have written it on the top. So if the acceleration has 2 components, you will put one more component like this. So no FBD is said to be complete if you don't put this acceleration on that picture. Okay, so please make sure you keep that in mind. Okay, so let's introduce ourselves to Newton's third law now. So first important point we realize is forces of interaction before we write the statement. Forces of interaction acting, whether they are contact based or non-contact based, it doesn't matter. Between two systems, are negative vectors of each other. Negative vectors of each other. So equal and opposite means negative vectors. If one is arbitrarily called, if one of those negative vectors is arbitrarily called action, force, with respect to one of the systems, then the other is called reaction. Okay, so there's no rule that which one should be called action. So if you call one as action with respect to one system, in the other one's free body diagram, reaction would be seen, which immediately tells you that the action and reaction won't act on the same FBD. They act on two different systems because of the interaction between those two systems. And using that idea, you should realize the statement. Okay, so this is your statement. The very famous one. For every action, so on one system, there is an equal and opposite reaction on the other system. So the ones in brackets are very important. We tend to forget that. So you should realize that these two don't act on the same FBD. Okay. Next important point, action and reaction should be of same type. Should be of same type of force. Which means if action is a normal reaction, then reaction is also a normal reaction types. That's why it's called normal reaction. Okay, so because the block is trying to push the floor on its FBD, it's normally acting force. That's why the word reaction came into picture. Okay, if action is a tension force, reaction also should be tension force. If action is gravitational force, reaction should also be gravitational force. You cannot have in one case action is, let's say, electromagnetic in nature and reaction is some other type of force. So action and reaction always should be of same type, whether it is microscopic type or the macroscopic classification. Whichever you choose, you cannot have two different types of forces being regarded as action and reaction. So please do understand that. So example, if action is friction, then reaction should also be friction. You cannot have some other thing. Okay. Right. Next important point regarding action and reaction. The action and reaction, I'm using A dash R, okay, so short form, must have same line of action. Okay, what does that mean? You remember line of action of a force? If a force vector is drawn and you extend that on both head and tail, that's called line of action. So you do that for action and you do that for reaction, they should pass through the same line. Okay, right. So you cannot have action acting like this and reaction on the floor. Let's say there's floor here, right? On reaction on the floor acting somewhere away from that. If you're putting action here, reaction also should be put along the same line. That's what I meant to say. Okay. So in the previous example, let's try to search for action and reaction very quickly. So we had a free body diagram of a block, and let's draw a free body diagram of the floor also separately. So block and floor have been separated, and on the block you had a normal reaction like this. That is because the block has acted on the floor like this. Okay, so let me be more precise. Draw the similar sized arrow in this manner. So this is your normal, and this is also n. Okay, so these are the action reaction pair. And you could see they don't act on the same body. And in this, you got n is equal to mg. That was a consequence of this object not moving. Just because n and mg are equal and opposite, don't say n and mg are the action reaction pair. That's not correct. Okay, so let me write that for our convenience here. Caution, mg bar and n bar on the block don't form action reaction pair. So that's a very important and very basic question that they keep asking in the exams. So just because they are equal and opposite, every equal and opposite force is not action reaction. That's like best way of remembering. Okay, they should have certain rules, and that rules have been written down here. Okay. So then for mg, who is the reaction then? You should realize mg is the interaction, non-contact interaction between block and earth. Okay, right? So it's a gravitational force. So on Earth's FBD, this mg would be acting in reverse, and that would be the reaction pair. Okay, you should understand that. Okay, last but not least, always with every Newton's law, we should also see where it is not applicable. Okay, right? So the last point, limitation. In quantum mechanics mechanical situations, sometimes Newton's third law will not be applicable. So in quantum mechanical situations, not always, but there are some exceptions. Okay, Newton's third law of motion, NLM3, is sometimes not applicable. So it's not a universal law. You should understand that. But at classical mechanics level, it's a nice situation that we can always trust upon. So during our physics syllabus of 11th and 12th class, we will find one situation, and I'll highlight at that point that I told you so, that in this particular situation, Newton's third law is not valid. Okay, so we'll wait for that situation to happen. Okay, so let's move ahead. Next topic is, now we have understood what is an FBD, what is action and reaction. There are certain rules that we need to follow while drawing the free body diagrams. So we'll quickly take them down. And whatever rules I'm going to put up here are for translations only. In rotational mechanics, again, I'll add some more rules. So we'll not waste our time here putting up the rules in a wholesale manner. Only for translation and rigid bodies, I'm putting the rules here. Okay, so first of all, you should try to understand that translatory motion of rigid body itself is of two types. Translatory motion of rigid bodies, there are two styles of that motion. One type is called curvilinear type of translatory motion. Second one is called rectilinear type. Okay, right. So curvilinear one is where the particle is translating, but it's moving in a curved path. And rectilinear one is that when translatory motion is happening, but it's moving along a straight line. Okay, right. So what is the main definition of translatory motion? Translatory motion requires velocity of vector of each point on the body, should be same. And you can do that even in curvilinear motion. Imagine take a ball and try to move it in a circle. Don't rotate the ball in your hand. Just hold the ball like this. If you can watch me, um, imagine you're holding something like this and then move it in a curved path like this in and around you. You could see every point on the phone like right now is moving with the same speed. Okay, so point here, the point here, and the point here, they need not only move straight to have same velocity. They can, but don't rotate it like this. You should not rotate the phone like this. This is rotatory motion. Okay, and while moving, if it always faces you like this, can you see it's almost as if I'm taking your picture at every position by moving in a curve. But if I rotate it like this, then that's not translatory motion. Okay, so this is called translatory motion in curvilinear path. Okay, so that's the whole idea. We'll deal with it more often once we go into curvilinear part. Okay, so for each of these situations of translations, we are going to write the rules now. Okay, so let's write one by one quickly. Consider always a rigid system in translation. Consider always a rigid system in translation. Okay, I'll give you an example as a idea of what I meant there. Okay, so imagine you are given a simple pulley block system like this, wherein you are tying a thread here. Thread goes around the pulley and connects two blocks. One is here on the table, another one is hanging over the table. Okay, right. So imagine this is M1 and this is M2. Okay, right. So M1 plus thread plus M2 together, can you consider a system? Yes, you can. If you want, you can. But that's very bad choice for the rigid body. As a system is a bad choice initially. Later on, we'll make this choice, but in the topic of center of mass. Right now, we don't want to do that, okay? Right? Because the topic is not yet done, right? This is why is that reason? Because this entire system that we are talking about, this one, this is not a rigid body. You could see the shape changes. So you just concentrate on only this system. You could see this point right now is moving here and this length is like this. Whereas over a period of time, the block comes here and this length would be longer. You can't say this entire body is maintaining its shape or entire system is maintaining shape. It's flexible and not rigid. Whereas if you take only M2 or only M1, I think that's a very good choice for the system. So always consider a rigid system in translation for the drawing the FBD and don't do this. If you do this, then you end up getting acceleration of the center of mass of the system, but not individual accelerations. So that's one very important thing that you should start off with, choice of the system. Second one, try to choose a system whose mass is constant. Try to choose a system whose mass is constant. Okay. Third one, choose as large a system as possible. Okay, right. Larger the one you choose, you would have to choose lesser free body diagrams, and then a solution would be much quicker in that context. Fourth one, consider only external forces, very important. Okay, right. Fifth one, distribution and point of application of forces don't matter. In translation, remember the heading always. We'll change these rules once we go to rotation. And point of application of forces don't matter. Let me write it again so that you realize in translation. Okay, right. So we'll keep these things in mind when we are drawing the free body diagrams. Okay, right. So we have done with normal reaction, we postponed friction. Now we are going to look at the next type of force that we'll encounter. So if I'm drawing the free body diagram of this M1, then there is a thread that is trying to apply a force. So that force that is applied, or even the thread, even small parts of this thread individually, if I draw the free body diagram, the force that will appear on the free body diagrams of such systems is called tension. Okay, so we'll try to study this force before we move on to actual free body diagram drawing. We will see, or observe is a better word, tension in 4 scenarios. Usually in our syllabus, there will be 4 scenarios in which we look at a free body diagram and we know that the tension force has to be put up on that FBD. Right. So we'll do it one by one. The first type happens in ideal string. Okay. So what are the properties of this ideal string? Ideal strings are light. That means mass tends to 0 but not equal to 0. Okay, so there is some mass. I'll tell you why. And inextensible. So it can't change its length. So light and inextensible strings in our topic is called as ideal string. There will be some more properties that I'll add once I move to the topic of elasticity, but these are the two basic principles that will characterize a ideal string. Okay. And you should realize that these ideal strings can only pull and not push. Okay. So very simple diagram that you can show off here is that there's a block, there's a floor, there is a thread, and there is a person who is using the thread and pulling it. Okay, so it's only able to pull. You can actually visualize if he tries to push off, this string will acquire a non-flexible shape and it will be slack condition. Okay, so you can't push this block using this string. You can only pull is what he's trying to tell. So if he's applying a force F, then free body diagrams that can be drawn. 3 free body diagrams I'll draw from this picture. Okay, one is of the block, and one is the thread itself, and one is the person. So the FBDs individually, the block. So if I remove the thread would be applying a force towards right. That would be called as tension, T. And this thread's FBD itself, the white one that we are looking at. Okay, now this T is that acting on this block is the action, then the reaction should act on the thread here, right? So this should be at T in this manner. Okay, and same thing, because thread is light and inextensible, mass is 0, there should be equal and opposite value of the force. So if this is T, this should be T. Okay, and there is acceleration, please understand, and it is incomplete FBD if you don't draw that acceleration. So this should move towards right, this also should move towards right, and also the person whose FBD I'll draw. Right, now I have removed the thread, then I have to put the reaction force from the thread, which is also the same form of tension. So this is also T. Okay, right. And if the person is also moving by pulling it, then I have to put A on all of them. Okay, right. So if this fellow's mass is capital M, this is an incomplete FBD. The reason is very simple. If there is an acceleration towards right, only this force cannot act on him. There should be a rightward force which is enabling this acceleration, and that we'll learn in a later chapter as friction force. Without friction between his feet and the floor, you will not be able to accomplish this task of pulling it. We'll realize that. So right now, just let's concentrate on these two FBDs now. So if this is M, okay, right, you can clearly write T is equal to, right, force is only one of them, and M into A. T is equal to M into A. Whereas for this one, since mass tends to 0, you can draw a part of this once FBD also. So if I take a small dx element out of this, and even on the dx element here, if I write tension T here and T plus dt here, since the value of dm tends to 0, even with the acceleration available, we should be able to write rightward minus leftward force, which is dt, should be equal to dm times a. You would have written this, right? And for ideal strings, since the mass is 0, even with the acceleration not equal to 0, we should have dt equal to 0. So what is meant by dt equal to 0? So what is meant by dt is equal to 0? dt is equal to 0 means change in tension throughout the string will be equal to 0. Change is 0. Don't say T is 0. So if dt is 0, whatever is the tension that is acting here, throughout the thread, the same tension will act. Okay, so that's what I mean by dt equal to 0, which means T is uniform throughout the thread. So that's the idea of an ideal string. In an ideal string, because its mass tends to 0, the thread throughout has the same tension. It transmits the same tension throughout. Okay, so if I go to the previous diagram of where the tension is, if this were an ideal string, if I have tension T here, every bits and pieces of this, if I draw small FBDs, there'll be same tension throughout, and therefore on the FBD of this one, if the tension here is T, this also will be T, given the pulley has certain properties. At least right now you can say the tension here to here at least will be the same. Okay, so we'll look at what happens here once we study the pulleys. So for this one, what is the equation? T is equal to M into A. So this is what will be right. So when T is non-zero, listen carefully on the sidelines. When T is non-zero, then thread is considered to be, there is a word that they'll use, tension exists in a thread. We say thread is taut, T-A-U-T, taut. Okay. And if tension becomes 0, then the opposite word for taut in the physics would be slack. Okay, so these are the two words associated with the ideal thread and its tension. Okay, let's see a question now. So if you have two blocks connected by a string in this manner, this is one block, this is another block, and there's a floor on which they're resting. It's a smooth floor. Okay, and they're connected by a thread, and you've been given a choice to pull these two blocks using a force. This is M1 and this is M2. Okay, right. Using a force F, okay, using a force F, we can pull M2 or M1. So which choice is better to reduce the possibility of breaking the thread? Okay, right. So you'll realize in real life, even though this is an ideal thread, it won't break. But in real life, even if the thread is very light, it will have some breakable tension. Okay, so if the tension value of the force in the thread exceeds some value, then it will break off. So the question is two cases. Either you can apply capital F towards right here, or capital F towards left here. Why left or right? Because the word pull is used. I think you should understand that. Okay, so pull towards right for M2 and pull towards left for M1. So maybe I should write that one here. So pull towards right or pull towards left. So the thread remains taut. Okay, so which choice is better depending on what should be the condition that you should write. Now, unlike the pulley case, can I say in both of these situations, can I say this is the entire one rigid body? I can take that because as the system moves, the shape doesn't change. Unlike the table problem, in which here I can't call this entire thing as one system because it is not rigid. The shape will keep changing. This L looking shape will acquire different shapes. Whereas this one, once it translates at every state, you take a picture of that, it will be overlapped onto the previous picture perfectly. So I can always take that. So I think you realize that acceleration of M1 plus thread plus M2 system is equal to F divided by M1 plus M2 in both cases. You realize that, I hope. Picture a free body diagram of this with F either this way or this way in two different cases. Total mass of the system and only one force is acting. So I've directly written that. So if we pull from M2 side or M1 side, it depends on what's the other idea, right? So if case 1 I take, so if this is M1, if M2 is pulled and I draw M1's FBD, then tension will act on M1. So the value of this tension would be simply M1 times of that acceleration that I wrote, F divided by M1 plus M2. And if M1 is pulled, we get similarly the value of tension would be this time proportional to the M2 times of F divided by M1 plus M2. So whichever one you are pulling, the tension force becomes proportional to the other mass, as you could clearly see. So if you pull the heavier block, then the tension would be lighter. Okay, so we should pull the heavier block so as to have lesser tension. I think that's the idea he was asking. So if two blocks are there and you're asked to pull, you always choose the heavier block to pull so that the lesser tension will act, because anyway in both the cases you'll get the same value of acceleration. So that's the importance of being able to choose the proper FBD. Okay, right. This was the first one. We're looking at ideal string. So let's move into the second type of situation where tension could be seen. It is light rod situations. Okay, unlike the ideal string, these can both push and pull. They won't get slack. Okay, and rest of all the concepts are same. Rest all concepts are same for both. So I'll not repeat the FBDs and all that, whatever. It's similar. Okay. Then the third important case in which you see tension applicable in FBDs is light but elastic cord. That means it is inextensible. Oh, sorry, it is extensible. Okay. So what does this do? This one obeys Hooke's law. Okay. Tension developed. That means what Hooke's law means is, we'll study it later. Tension developed in the thread or the cord, as I call it, is equivalent to k times of x, where x is the extension over its natural length. It's like a rubber band, okay, natural length. And what is the k? K is called stiffness constant. It's a property of that material. So more you extend this kind of light elastic rod, more tension you end up getting. So that's the idea of Hooke's law. It's a linear relation between tension. It's a nice rhyming. Okay, tension is proportional to extension. Okay, tension is proportional to extension. Extension is the cause for the tension that is developed, and both are having a proportionality constant of stiffness constant. What's the units of the stiffness constant? Newton per meter. Okay, right. Next one. These can be, it's like cord is like a string. Okay, right. This can only pull, no pushing. And the last situation is the spring. Okay, the symbol that you will see for a spring in a diagram are of two types. Either you would see something like this in any picture, or in mechanics you see something like this. These are the two symbols that you would immediately recognize that he's talking about a spring in mechanics. Okay, so let me give you a picture of such a thing. Imagine there is a rigid contact on which this spring is connected. It's a helical coil spring, and there is a person who is pulling that spring. Already he pulled it. Imagine before pulling, the spring was here at its natural length. N dot L is the symbol for natural length, and he has already pulled it up till this level. Okay, so assume this is its extension. So X is the extension. So if the spring, all springs need not obey Hooke's law. Even light elastic cord also, if nothing is mentioned, we'll assume it obeys Hooke's law. Okay, so if it obeys Hooke's law, that is tension proportional to extension, then you should be able to again write T is equal to K times X. Okay. K is called either stiffness constant, and in case of spring, it's also known as spring constant. Okay. In vector form, people also write this in this fashion. T bar is equal to, or sign in terms of sign we'll write T is equal to, they'll write minus Kx. Minus represents the sign. Okay. So tension acts in reverse direction of extension. That means you pull towards right, then the tension will act left. You can push also. This springs, unlike cords, can also push. So you push towards left, the tension will act towards right. Okay. So that's why minus sign is also depicted in some books. This is the vector form. This is the magnitude form. Okay. So one very important thing that I already uttered, let me write it down. Springs can both push and pull. Okay. Right. So one more apparatus that we would be keeping on encountering, with which we'll start solving problems from tomorrow. So by today we'll have finished all the theories and concepts. Okay, so tomorrow would be definitely an interesting one to look forward to, because we are all like solving problems than taking up theories. But we should never skip the theory part, because we'll never know when someone would be quizzing you upon the theory. So you should know which is action, which is reaction. So and that's the reason why we are doing it in a very formal manner. Trust me, tomorrow's class you will get a lot of problems, okay, and you will enjoy them. So the last concept before we close the class for today is the pulley. Again, pulleys keep evolving as we go into different chapters. For this particular chapter, we'll be considering ideal pulleys, which are nothing but light, smooth, okay, right? And these conditions are definite conditions. And there's another condition which is conditional. You may or may not have this. And in this topic, it doesn't matter, but where later on topics it matters. Okay, so whether the pulley is small or large may or may not matter, but they should definitely be light and smooth during this topic, especially with no friction available. All right, so you should be able to consider this as the ideal pulley. So one of the basic examples we will come across when you are introduced to the concept of pulley is of Atwood's machine. It's a name of a person who devised this machine. He was a scientist actually. So you might have seen this picture many number of times in your physics career. So this is your pulley there, and you have a thread running over the pulley like this. And you have two blocks hanging on the either side of the pulley. This is the basic diagram of an Atwood's machine. So let's label those masses. Imagine this is your M1 and this is M2. Okay. Acceleration due to gravity is, let's say, acting downward, and for the consideration of this problem, M2 is, let's say, greater than M1. And system is released from rest, let's say. Okay, right. Some of the few important things that you need to realize here is to being able to draw the free body diagrams of two blocks. Okay, so if I draw M1's free body diagram, and then on this side M2's free body diagram. Okay, so let's say this is M1 and this is M2. You see there is thread here, so it will be pulling up and there will be weight in the downward direction. So thread force would be T1 on this side and M1G acting downward, and the thread force on this side would be T2 and M2G acting downward. Okay, right. Then you also note on the sidelines that for the pulley, and the thread will go around it like this. I've drawn it separated out. So the tension T1 that acts on this side and the tension T2 that acts on this side, let me share it with the same. So this is T1 and this is T2. Okay, right. So each and every part of this thread, right? So if I take a small element, a small arc here of the thread, there will be a normal reaction. I've taken, let's suppose, a part here. Can you see that part I have drawn here? Okay, this part I have drawn here. There would be a tension, let's say a T this way and T plus dt this way. And there will be a normal reaction which is acting from the pulley's contact in the normal direction. So something like this would be the direction of normal reaction, which is a small valued normal reaction. So I'll write as dn. Because I'm taking a differential element, forces are also small. Okay, so the value of the normal reaction is dn. Now what actually happens here is that since there is no mass for this small element, like last time, value of dt should be equal to 0. This should be equal to 0. What is meant by dt is equal to 0? Whatever tension acts on the left side of this should be equal to right side, and that I can take it as a complete extrapolation till here. That means this tension and this tension also should be equal to 0. So this should imply that the value of T1 should be equal to T2. Not only that, you should realize that the vector sum of this T and T, remember this T and T will not be anti-parallel and cancel with each other. Okay, so these two would have a small arc like this, and that if I take it as at the center, this is, let's say, d theta. Okay, vector sum of this T and T for tomorrow, you should realize, right? T comma T at the differential element result in, I should say, T d theta. So what actually happens is the value of the dn can be written equal to T d theta. That's what I want you to realize. So if someone asks you what is the net force on the pulley, listen carefully. If the net force on the pulley, then it is the vector sum of all reaction dn's. Since the vector sum of all dn's on the thread would be equal to sum of these tensions, the vector sum of all dn's on this pulley will also be equal to sum of these two tensions. So you realize that net force on pulley is equal to T1 equal to T2 equal to, let's say, T, then it will be 2T in the downward direction. So that's about the pulleys FBD. So once we realize all of that, this should be T and this should be T. And since we know by experiment that M2 actually moves down because it's heavier, this should be acceleration A and this should be acceleration A. So the equations of motion, always I told you, is incomplete without FBD and FBD is incomplete without A. So I have done all the possible job here. Always remember forces on LHS of the equation and acceleration term on the right side. Okay, so net upward force is equal to mass into acceleration is the equation. So what is the net upward force here? T minus m1g is equal to m1a. And here acceleration direction is downward. So net downward force is equal to m2 into a. So what is net downward force? m2g minus t is equal to m2a. Okay, right. So you can see there are two equations, two unknowns. That's how you always count Newton's laws of motion solving. So you need to know how many equations, that many unknowns. If they are there, then they are solvable. What are the two equations? These are the ones that you are looking at. And what are the two unknowns? The two unknowns are, you don't know the tension, you don't know the acceleration. So when you solve for them, I'll leave that solving to you. Value of tension and acceleration. Acceleration is a very famous one. Heavier mass minus lighter mass into g, that is the imbalance of that force, right? So if these two were equal, this imbalance would not have been there. The total imbalance of the load divided by total inertia of the load. So what is the total inertia or the mass? m2 plus m1. That's the best way to remember that. And when you substitute it back in one of the equations, you'll get the value of tension as 2m1 m2. It will be the harmonic mean of this thing times of g. So this is one of the basic problems of how we apply the free body diagram and solve a problem of pulley. So okay, right. We'll try to take some important misconceptions also in tomorrow's class, and from tomorrow we'll be solving a lot of problems applying all the concepts that we have learned about free body diagrams and the different types of forces which we got to see in today's class. Okay, so I understand that two classes of lot of theory might have bored you, but it's very, very important that at the start of any topic, you get rid of all the important concepts so that your base and foundation is very strong. And if someone quizzes you or you want to teach someone else, you need to have all these concepts intact. It's not just about problem solving. I hope you appreciate that. Okay, we'll meet tomorrow.